Prince Harry continues his incredible work in Ukraine. Sussex.com has the story, and of course, I have thoughts and sentiments, so let's get started. The Duke of Sussex is in Ukraine continuing his incredibly impactful work. He's participated on a panel, delivered a keynote speech, as well as other engagements. Today, I'll be giving an update directly from Sussex.com as well as my thoughts, but before we get to that, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. The first update will be coming from Sussex.com, and it's titled Day 1 in Kyiv, Honoring Service, Shaping the Future. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, began his latest visit to Kyiv with a clear sense of purpose, joining global leaders, policymakers, and veterans at the Kyiv Security Forum, one of Eastern Europe's most significant platforms for dialogue on security, resilience, and the future of the Euro-Atlantic community. Set against the backdrop of a war that continues to shape not only Ukraine's future, but the wider international order, the opening day brought into focus a central theme: how resilience is built, sustained, and shared. Addressing the forum, the Duke spoke of the clarity he feels each time he returns to Ukraine, a clarity about what is at stake and who is carrying the burden. His remarks centered not on abstract geopolitics, but on people, those defending the country, those sustaining communities, and those rebuilding lives under extraordinary pressure. He reflected on Ukraine's endurance and leadership in the face of sustained aggression, describing a nation that has not only held the line, but adapted and innovated in real time. Quote, "This is not just resilience, this is leadership in real time." The Duke also underscored the broader implications of the war, framing it as a struggle rooted in values, sovereignty, freedom, and the integrity of democratic systems. His message was clear: Ukraine's fight is not isolated. It is deeply connected to global stability and shared principles. A central moment of the day saw the Duke participate in a high-level panel discussion on recovery, reintegration, and resilience. Moderated by Alina Frolova, the conversation explored how Ukraine, now home to over 1 million veterans, is reshaping global understanding of what it means to support those who have served. Opening the discussion, the Duke reflected on the role of sport and community in recovery, drawing on his work with the Invictus Games Foundation. He emphasized that recovery is not simply physical, it is about rebuilding identity, confidence, and purpose. Throughout the panel, Ukrainian veterans shared deeply personal accounts of their journeys, from pivotal turning points in recovery to the challenges of reintegration and the invisible barriers many still face. The discussion highlighted a powerful shift. Veterans are not only recipients of support, but active contributors to society and national resilience. Their lived experience is helping to shape new models of recovery, models that extend beyond Ukraine and offer lessons for the international community. The Duke engaged throughout, listening and responding to those stories, reinforcing a key theme of the session: that effective systems must be built around real human experience, not just policy frameworks. In both his speech and the panel discussion, the Duke returned to the enduring human impact of conflict. He spoke candidly about the psychological toll carried by service personnel and civilians alike, the trauma, exhaustion, and uncertainty that persist long after headlines fade. He also warned of the dangers of complacency, urging the international community not to grow numb to the realities of war. Quote, "War is not only fought on the battlefield, it is fought in the mind." This recognition of the invisible wounds of war framed much of the day's conversation, reinforcing the importance of long-term support systems for veterans and their families. The Kyiv Security Forum has long served as a platform for shaping strategic thinking on international security. This year, that role is more significant than ever. Across sessions, a consistent message emerged. Ukraine is not only defending itself, but contributing critical knowledge and innovation to the global community. From modern warfare tactics to approaches in rehabilitation and reintegration, Ukraine's experience is informing how nations prepare for and respond to conflict. The Veterans Panel in particular demonstrated how lived experience is driving that contribution, turning personal recovery into collective insight. Despite the weight of the discussions, the day was not defined by hardship alone. The Duke highlighted the work of organizations supporting both veterans and civilians, from rehabilitation centers restoring lives to humanitarian efforts delivering essential aid under constant threat. These examples, he noted, represent what light looks like even in the darkest places. This balance between acknowledging the cost of war and recognizing the strength of those responding to it defined the tone of the day. As the forum continues, the question at its heart remains, is there light ahead? On day one, Ukraine itself provided part of that answer. Through the voices of its veterans, the resilience of its people, and its continued leadership under pressure, the country is not only enduring, it is shaping the future of recovery, reintegration, and resilience for others to follow. The Duke's presence reinforced that message, that standing with Ukraine is not only an act of solidarity, but a commitment to the values it represents. Day one closed with a renewed sense of purpose and a shared understanding that the lessons emerging from Ukraine today will resonate far beyond its borders. Ukraine, Day 2. The Enduring Scars of War, From Soil to Soul. I really like that title. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, today continued his visit to Kyiv, Ukraine, with a day that brought into sharp focus both the enduring human cost of war and the extraordinary resilience of those working to rebuild lives in its wake. Sunrise over Kyiv, and the Duke's first visit was to the small town of Bucha, a place that has become synonymous with the brutality of Russia's invasion. It is also increasingly a place defined by the painstaking work of recovery. In woods outside of the town, the Duke joined deminers from the Halo Trust, the world's largest humanitarian landmine clearance organization, to see firsthand the scale of contamination left behind by retreating forces. Fields, roads, and homes remain littered with explosive remnants of war, hidden dangers that continue to threaten civilian lives long after the front lines have moved on. Accompanied by the Halo team, the Duke entered a cleared section of a minefield and observed the meticulous, high-risk work required to make land safe again. He also witnessed how new technologies are transforming this effort. From drones that can map contamination with precision to advanced detection systems and robotic tools that reduce risk to human life, innovation is helping to accelerate what would otherwise be a generational task. That is one of the things that I really love that technology is providing, safer means to keep our world safe, but also to clear out unsafe things like landmines, to go underwater for extended periods of time, to elevate in the air, to search for things, better search protocols and practices, etc. I love when technology serves human, not the other way around. Yet even with these advances, the scale remains staggering. Ukraine is now one of the most heavily mined countries in the world, and clearance efforts are expected to take decades. For communities in places like Bucha, this work is not abstract. It determines whether children can play safely, whether farmers can return to their land, and whether families can rebuild their homes without fear. For the Duke, the visit carried a deeply personal resonance. Nearly 3 decades after his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, brought global attention to the impact of landmines, he witnessed a new chapter in that same struggle. One where the urgency remains, but the tools and context have evolved. The message, however, is unchanged. The presence of landmines is not only a legacy of conflict, but an ongoing humanitarian crisis. Later that morning, the Duke attended the Invictus Games Ukraine Forum, where he joined veterans, partners, and supporters to reflect on a decade of the Invictus movement in Ukraine. Marking 10 years since Ukraine's participation, the forum celebrated not only sporting achievement, but the deeper purpose at the heart of Invictus: recovery, dignity, and the power of community for those who have served. Speaking on a panel alongside Ukrainian leaders and Invictus competitors, the Duke reflected on the lessons emerging from Ukraine, lessons that are reshaping how nations support their veterans, both in times of peace and conflict. The day concluded with the Duke visiting Ukraine's new National Military Memorial Cemetery, where he laid flowers at the grave of a fallen soldier. In a moment of quiet reflection, he paid tribute to the sacrifice of those who have lost their lives and to the families who carry that loss forward each day. It was a solemn reminder that behind every headline are individuals, loved, mourned, and remembered. Today's engagements underscored a clear and urgent truth. While the world's attention may shift, the realities on the ground in Ukraine do not. Recovery is not a moment, but a long-term commitment, one that demands sustained support, innovation, and international resolve. Reflecting on the visit, the Duke said, "This visit has reinforced a truth the world cannot afford to forget, that the scars of war do not fade when the fighting stops. They endure in the lives of those who have served and sacrificed, and in the very land beneath their feet, where landmines and unexploded ordnance continue to threaten communities long after the front lines have shifted. Recovery is not measured in moments, but in decades, and it demands our sustained attention, commitment, and care. Too often, our focus is drawn to how conflicts end, rather than how peace is sustained. Yet it is in that long, quieter work of recovery where the future is truly secured." Through his work with organizations like the Halo Trust and the Invictus movement, the Duke continues to highlight both the cost of conflict and the extraordinary efforts underway to address it, standing alongside those who are not only surviving war, but actively shaping what recovery looks like in its aftermath. I would also like to add something to that update. He's not only standing with those people, but he is working tirelessly along with his team at Invictus to provide outlets for those same people to help in the aftermath, not only mentally, but physically, help them build and sustain community. Invictus Foundation does so much incredible work. And I never want that to get missed because the games are so fun and there's always so much to talk about, so much to take in, so much to dissect when it comes to the Invictus games. But it's important to remember that the foundation behind the games never stops its work. Despite the games being biannual, the Invictus Foundation is year-round, and they do incredible work. They're continuing to expand not only in location and geographically, but they're expanding in their services and the things that they offer and the things that they address as well. Their commitment to veterans and their families and service members is unmatched, and I love when we have a moment to take a second to reflect on that and to continue to elevate the work and talk about it. Thank you so much for watching the Sharion Sade YouTube channel. I appreciate you watching my content. If you haven't already, please don't forget to go ahead and like this video by hitting the thumbs up. Please don't forget to subscribe by hitting the subscribe button. And don't forget to comment along the way. If you feel so inclined, please don't forget to share so that more people can find us. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Now let's get back to the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished leaders and friends, it is an honor and a privilege to return to Kiev, my third visit to your beautiful country, and a privilege to be asked to speak to you today. Each time I return, I feel something that is difficult to describe, but it is impossible to ignore. It is a sense of clarity. Clarity about what matters, clarity about what is at stake, and clarity about who is carrying that burden. So let me begin differently today. Not by speaking about Ukraine, but by speaking to you. To those defending this country, to those holding families, communities, and institutions together under extraordinary strain, the world sees you, and the world respects you. I am not here as a politician. I am here as a soldier who understands service, as a humanitarian who has seen the human cost of conflict, and as a friend of Ukraine who believes the world must not grow used to this war or numb to its consequences. Because what is happening here is not simply a war about territory. It is a war about values, about sovereignty, about whether the principles that underpin our shared democracy shall hold meaning. The theme of this forum, as we've heard, asks darkness or dawn. Is light ahead? And standing here in a country that has endured so much, it would be easy to feel the weight of darkness. But Ukraine has already begun to answer that question, not in speeches, but in action. For more than a decade, since 2014, Ukraine has stood on the front line of a struggle that extends far beyond its borders. And since the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian people have done something extraordinary. You have adapted. You have endured, and you have held the line. Few believed that would be possible, and yet, here you are, still standing, still fighting, and still leading. Because this is what leadership looks like in the modern world. Not just strength in arms, but strength in unity. Not just resilience, but innovation under fire. And not just survival, but purpose. Ukraine is now at the forefront of modern warfare, developing some of the most advanced drone capabilities anywhere in the world, adapting faster than larger forces, and proving that agility and determination can counter brute force. That is not just resilience. That is leadership in real time. I've seen what strength looks like in conflict. I saw it during my time serving alongside allies in Afghanistan. Different nations, different backgrounds, but united by a shared mission and a shared responsibility. And what I see here in Ukraine is that same principle. Strength, not just in bravery and capability, but in unity, in trust, and in the willingness of nations to stand together and carry the burden together. That is what strength looks like today. Not isolation, not division, but unity, mutual respect, and the resolve to act. Strength is not measured by how loudly we speak, but by how consistently we stand for the values we hold dear. But we must also be honest about the cost. The human toll of this war is truly staggering. And behind every statistic is a life, a family, and a future changed forever. And beyond the visible losses, there is the invisible cost. The trauma carried by those returning from the front. The psychological strain on families living under constant threat and bombardment. The exhaustion that comes from years of uncertainty and grief. This is not something that ends when the war ends. It is something that must be recognized and supported for years to come. Because war is not only fought on the battlefield, it is fought in the mind, through disinformation, through fatigue, and through the slow erosion of hope. Psychological warfare designed to divide. And there are those on the front lines who know exactly what is at stake, and those at home who are exhausted, and understandably so. And that tension is very real. And yet, Ukraine continues to hold together, and hold together you must. I have seen this nation's resilience firsthand through members of the Invictus community, Ukrainian servicemen and women who have faced unimaginable challenges and continue to lead with strength, dignity, and purpose. For those Ukrainians that by day are keeping the economy and the country going, and by night are under bombardment, your service, your courage, and the dedication to your country is recognized and appreciated more than you will ever know. Now, across the world, many are angry, rightly so. Many are scared, understandably so. And many of us disagree on politics. And most of us will agree that there's a lot to fix to bring us back to the middle. So, when some are striving to dismantle democracy, the many should continue to speak up, to be heard, to be counted, and to be the loudest voice, choosing life and freedom. For we know there can be devastating consequences of silence, delay, and lack of accountability. This year marks 10 years of Ukraine's participation in the Invictus Games, a decade that has shown the world what recovery can look like. Not just physical recovery, but the rebuilding of identity, of confidence, and of hope. And during my visit to Lviv, I saw the work of the Superhuman Center, restoring not only bodies, but lives. And it is proof that even in the darkest moments, humanity has an extraordinary capacity to rebuild. And that same spirit extends beyond the front lines. Across Ukraine, organizations are working tirelessly to meet the needs of civilians affected by this war. And among them, World Central Kitchen has been providing millions of meals to those displaced, to families living under constant threat, and to communities cut off from normal supply chains. Their work is simple in concept, full of risk, and profound in impact. Because in the middle of conflict, a hot meal is not just sustenance. It is survival. It is dignity. It is a reminder that people have not been forgotten. That is what light looks like, even in the darkest places. But even as communities rebuild and support one another, the dangers of war persist. Across fields, towns, and villages, landmines and unexploded ordnance remain, a silent, enduring threat to civilians long after the fighting moves on. Now, organizations like the Halo Trust are doing extraordinary work to clear these remnants of war, turning danger back into possibility. But the scale of this challenge is immense. which means our responsibility does not end when the war ends. It continues in the work of recovery, of rebuilding, and of ensuring that future generations can live without fear beneath their feet. Now, if I may step back for just a moment. There was a time, not so long ago, when many believed that we had reached a kind of historical endpoint, that liberal democracy had prevailed, and that major ideological conflict was behind us. But history has a way of reminding us otherwise. What we are witnessing today is not the end of struggle, but its evolution. And the lesson is clear. Democracy is not inevitable. It is not self-sustaining, and it is not immune to challenge. It must be defended, actively, consistently, and collectively. And that is why Ukraine matters so deeply. Because Ukraine has chosen a path grounded in freedom, in dignity, and democratic values, even in the midst of war. We must be absolutely clear about the nature of this war. This is not an accident, nor a misunderstanding, and nor the inevitable fog of conflict. It is the product of sustained, deliberate policy, planned, executed, and defended at the highest levels. It begins with the violation of the Budapest Memorandum, an agreement under which Ukraine relinquished the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in exchange for binding assurances of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Those assurances were not just broken, they were discarded. And when commitments of that magnitude are violated, the damage does not stop at Ukraine's borders. It strikes at the credibility of every international guarantee, every non-proliferation effort, and every promise made between nations. But the consequences are not only strategic, they are profoundly human. Across occupied territories, there is mounting documented evidence of systemic war crimes. Deliberate attacks on civilians, mass killings, torture, sexual violence, and the forced deportation of entire populations. In places like Bucha and Markle, the world has seen what happens when those policies are carried out on the ground. Civilians executed, communities erased, and human dignity stripped away. And nowhere is this more chilling than in the treatment of Ukraine's children. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the unlawful deportation and transfer of children, acts that are not incidental to war, but central to a wider strategy. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian children have been forcibly taken from their homes, many separated from parents who were killed, detained, or simply lost in the chaos, and transported into Russia or Russian-controlled territories. There, they are subjected to a system designed to erase who they are, given new identities, new citizenship, placed into Russian families, and cut off from language, culture, and country. Obstacles are deliberately created to prevent their return. Under international law, this forcible transfer of children from one national group to another is not just a war crime. It can constitute an act of genocide when carried out with intent to destroy a people's identity. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not collateral damage. This is not the chaos of war spilling over. This is organized, systemic, intentional, and designed to endure long after the fighting stops. President Putin, no nation benefits from the continued loss of life we are witnessing. There is still a moment now to stop this war, to prevent further suffering for Ukrainians and Russians alike, and to choose a different course. Years into this war, with immense losses and limited gains, it is increasingly clear that this path offers no victory, only more loss. The cost continues to rise, with no outcome that justifies the human toll. But while we recognize these realities, we must also recognize something equally important. Ukraine is not standing alone. Across Europe and beyond, there has been extraordinary support. Countries have stepped forward, often at real cost, and that matters. Because solidarity is not just a principle, it is a capability. Europe has stood up in profound ways. And that support has mattered, and Ukraine knows it. The task now is to match endurance with speed, solidarity with scale, and commitment with consistency. What has already been done has proven what is possible, and the scale of this moment demands more. Decisive action, delivered quickly, saves lives. and clarity of commitment shortens wars. The United States has a singular role in this story, not only because of its power, but because when Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons, America was part of the assurance that Ukraine's sovereignty and borders would be respected. This is a moment for American leadership, a moment for America to show that it can honor its international treaty obligations, not out of charity, but out of its own enduring role in global security and strategic stability. Respect. Ukraine has earned the respect of the world. Through its leadership, Ukraine has very much earned the respect of the world. Through its leadership, through its resilience, and through its conduct. And of course, through its innovation. And respect really matters. Because when leaders act without respect for sovereignty, for international law, for human life, well, respect once lost is rarely recovered, and never quickly. And Ukraine has taken the opposite path. And that distinction could not be clearer. As President Zelensky has made clear, we are defending our right to live. So, the question is no longer whether Ukraine will stand. You have already answered that. The question is, will the rest of the world match your resolve? Because one day soon, this war will end. And history will not ask what we said, it will ask what we did. Who acted? Who stepped forward? And who chose courage over caution? Ukraine has already given its answer. Now is the time for the rest of us to give ours. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.